In this video, we're going to have a look at creating a loading bar like this one in Unity. Let's get started. So this scene is completely empty, except I have a camera and a canvas with a background element and a load level button. And this is just a standard Unity button. I've just changed the way it looks a little bit. So we want to create a new script. Let's also create an empty game object for this script to sit on. Let's reset the transform on it and let's call it level loader. We then take our level loader and drag it to the top and add a component, which we will also go ahead and call level loader. Choose C# and hit create and add. Let's now double click this to open it up in Visual Studio. And the first thing we want to do here is get rid of both the update and the start method. And we'll also not be using the system.collections.generic namespace. So the first thing that we want to create is a function that we can call from another script or from our button that will tell this script that we want to load a new level. To allow ourselves to access it from another class, let's make it public. It's not going to return anything, so we'll write void. And let's just call it load level. Now we probably also want to be able to specify what level to load. We can either give it a string here for the name of the scene or an integer for the index. Let's just do a scene index here. Now we want to access the scene manager in order to load a new scene. To do that, we go up here and include Unity Engine.scene management. This way down here, we can now write scene manager.load scene, and we want to choose the one called load scene async. Now the normal load scene method basically pauses the entire game in order to spend all its resources trying to load a new scene. However, load scene async loads the scene asynchronously in the background. That means that it keeps our current scene and all of the behaviors in it running while it's loading our new scene into memory. What we can then do is get some information back from our scene manager about the progress of this operation. To do that, let's first finish off our method here by giving it our scene index. And the cool thing about this load scene async method is that it actually returns an object with information about how our operation is going. This object is called async operation. So if we now go down here and make an async operation variable, we can just call it operation and set it equal to our load scene async method. Well, then we can actually go into our operation object and access properties storing information about the operation. Most importantly, we can get information about whether or not we are done loading. And we also have this progress value. This is a float going from 0 to 1 that indicates the current state of the process. So all we need to do is make sure that while this operation is running, we continually update our UI to reflect this progress variable. And because this method is running asynchronously, meaning as a coroutine, we'll have to do that in a coroutine as well. If you've never had a look at coroutines before, this part might be a bit confusing, and that's mostly because of how weird the syntax for coroutines is. Basically, what we'll do is go down here and create a new method, and instead of writing void, we write IEnumerator. We can call this method load asynchronously. I think I spelled that correctly. Then as an argument, we'll also want to take in the same scene index. And we can now put this line of code down here instead. Then we can create a while loop, and this loop will continue running as long as operation.isDone is equal to false. Or if we want to write this in shorthand notation, we'll write while the operation is not done. Then inside of this while loop, we'll first off update our progress. That could be by simply writing out our progress in a debug.log statement. We could simply write operation.progress into our log. And then after every message, we'll go ahead and wait a frame and then continue our while loop. So we'll write yield return null. And this is going to wait until the next frame before continuing. So what's happening here is that whenever we call this coroutine, we go ahead and load a scene asynchronously using the scene index specified. We then store information about the status of our current operation into a variable called operation. Then we start a while loop that will run until the process is done. And each time it runs through, we are going to throw out a message about our current progress. And then we are going to wait a frame until we do that again. Now we of course also need to call this coroutine. So up here inside of our load level function, we'll write start coroutine and we'll input the load asynchronously coroutine. And of course, as an argument, we put scene index. So there are currently a few problems with this, but if we go ahead and try it out, it should actually be working. Now, of course, whenever we load a scene, we want to go to File, Build Settings, and make sure that the scene we want to load is in here. I'm going to add first the level 1, which is the one that we're currently at, and then level 2, which is the scene that we want to transition to. Now the level 2 scene here is super simple. It's just a panel with a text element that says level 2. And that also means that this is going to load ridiculously fast. And so we'll probably get a few messages down here, but it's possible that we only get one when beginning and when we end. To find out, let's set a connection between our button and our level loader. To do that, let's select our button. Let's go down here and add an on-click event. Let's drag in the level loader object, and under that, let's go to the level loader script and access the load level function. The level that we want to load is that with an index of 1. Now when we hit play and hit load level, we can see indeed that the transition happens lightning fast. It goes from 0 to 0.9 and then the level's loaded. However, this is a bit weird. Not that the transition happens this fast, that's a great thing, but the fact that it ends at 0.9. The reason for this is that whenever Unity wants to load a new scene, it does so in 2 stages. The first stage is loading. Here Unity loads from the memory the assets that make the new scene. If you have a big scene, this is what is going to take the most time. And so this is the phase that we want to show using our loading bar. The second scene, however, is activation. Here Unity goes through and deletes all of the old stuff that we don't need anymore and replaces them with the newly loaded ones. Now when it comes to the progress value, Unity will during the loading stage go from 0 to 0.9 and it will do so in increments. However, during the activation stage, Unity goes from 0.9 to 1 and it doesn't actually do any values in between. That means that this value is actually only useful for us from 0 to 0.9. And Unity also reflects that by setting isDone equal to true as soon as the loading stage is done. So what we can do is use a bit of quick math in order to make our value from 0 to 0.9 go from 0 to 1. To do that, we make a float called progress and we set it equal to math.clamp1. This clamps a value between 0 and 1. And in here we feed it our operation.progress divided by 0.9. Now instead of debug.logging our operation.progress, we simply feed it our progress. This way if we go back and play and hit load level, it goes from 0 to 1. But debugging values like this is boring. Let's instead add a cool slider. And after that I'll show you what it looks like if you're loading a more complicated scene. So let's go to our canvas here. Let's add a new UI panel. Let's change the image here to none to make it just a solid color. Let's make sure that it scales to our entire screen. Let's then bump up the alpha to make it non-transparent. Let's also set the color value to the same as our background here. Let's call this one the loading screen. And let's go and right click and add a UI slider on top. Now there are a few things that we can change on this slider. The first thing is that we don't need a transition because we don't want to be able to interact with it. And so I'll also set interactable to false. I'll disable navigation. And let's also go in here and delete our handle slide area. It's starting to look like a loading bar. We then take our entire slider and maybe scale it up a bit. You can see now that we can adjust this value down here, which goes between 0 and 1 by default, in order to fill up our slider. However, if we set it to 1, it will actually not go all the way there. To change this, let's go to our fill area and let's scale this a tiny bit to the right. We can also select our fill and change the color here to a light red. Now as we adjust our value, we can see that looks much better. Now all we need to do is reference our loading screen so that we can enable and disable it, and reference our slider so that we can change the value through script. So let's disable our loading screen. Let's go into our script. Let's create a reference to our loading screen. We'll make it of type GameObject and call it loading screen. Now we also want a reference to our slider. To do that, we'll have to include Unity Engine.UI. Now we can create a public slider variable called slider. Then when we start loading the scene, we can set loading screen active by calling setActive and inserting true. And while we're loading, instead of debug.logging our progress, we can set slider.value equal to progress. So let's save that and head into Unity. Let's select our level loader and we should see 2 slots appearing. Let's drag our loading screen into the loading screen slot and our slider into the slider slot. Now when we play and hit load level, we should very quickly see a slider appearing. Let's try and go under our build settings and change the level here. Instead of loading up this test level, I'll go ahead and load a level from the Unity Survival Shooter project. This is freely available on the asset store and I'll have a link in the description. Let's drag in the complete game scene. Let's hit play. So let's hit load level. Cool, right? Now I'm on a really fast computer, so that's still loaded pretty quickly, but hopefully you get the idea. The final thing that we can go in here and add is some kind of text that also shows the progress, maybe in percentage. So let's right click on our slider, go UI, text. Let's go into our scene view. I'm going to snap this to the right by holding down Alt and clicking here. I'm also going to change the font to a Roboto font. You can download that for free. I'll then align it to the right and center Also bring up the font size to something like 18. And let's just insert 20% here, just so we can see how that looks. Let's then take the text element and drag it a tiny bit to the left. And voila, we have a percentage text. Now we can rename this to progress text. We can go into our level loader. At the top, we want a reference to a text object. We'll call it progress text. Then down here where we set our slider value, we'll also set progress text dot text equal to progress multiplied with 100 to make it into a percentage, and then we'll add the percentage sign. Let's save that, go into Unity, select our level loader, drag in our progress text, disable our loading screen, hit play, and yay! We've got text. That's pretty much it for this video. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a future one. Also, it's been a while since I mentioned I have a Patreon page. Patreon is a way for you to support me with a monthly donation. You can donate any amount and it's cancelable at any time. Patreon is one of the things that keep this channel going. Oh, and also this video was inspired by a written tutorial by Alan Sacconi. He has a lot of great tutorials on more advanced Unity subjects. I definitely suggest you check them out. Other than that, thanks for watching and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all of the awesome Patreon supporters who donated in May. And a special thanks to Derek Heemskirk, Faisal Marify, Stone Gamer, CMDR Firestone 38, Thomas Vorley, James Calhoun, Cyborg Mummy, and Jason the Tito. If you want to become a patron yourself, you can do so at patreon.com/Brackeys.